Well, here we are. I predicted at least 2 years ago now that the Epstein stuff would be the true bellwether to decide whether or not this country is what it's supposed to be, or whether or not we're captured, we're living in some sort of movie, some sort of alternate universe. Well, it looks like all of those predictions are coming true. And it looks like this is going to be the major issue that I thought it was going to be 2 years ago. So it raises an even larger, more philosophical question. And we hear all of our politicians talking about equal justice under the law. No one's above the law. But we see it time and time again, at least over the course of my lifetime, where people who are obviously guilty of heinous acts are never investigated. They're never even looked at. A lot of times you'll have some police officer at the lowest levels start to look into something, and then the investigation bubbles up, and finally it gets up to a high enough level, and it gets taken over by the FBI or somebody like that, and then the whole thing gets shut down. They get a phone call, they get a message, and it all goes away. We see this over and over and over again. And it begs a larger question. Is it even possible within the construct of our society to have equal justice under the law that by its very nature implies impartiality, which is something that human beings cannot achieve? So how do we implement a mechanism? How do we implement a structure that could actually levy equal justice under the law? We see it where our politicians, we send them to Washington. Maybe we know them, maybe we know the local guy. Mr. Smith goes to Washington, and we send them up there, and all of a sudden they're not behaving the way that we anticipated. They're not making decisions that we thought they would make, and we can't explain what's going on. And we see this over and over and over again. So the question becomes, is there any way out of this? Is there any kind of a construct that would yield impartiality? And I think of it from a fundamental standpoint of somebody has to enforce the laws. I can't enforce the laws. You can't enforce the laws. You cannot enforce the laws unless you are a sworn officer of the court. We don't even have the authority to investigate. We can't subpoena. We can't do anything like that. So at some point, it takes someone with a badge that will try to investigate, that will try to dig up facts, and will try to connect the dots, and will attempt to bring someone to justice. But when you're dealing with the uber rich and powerful, when you realize the assets that they have at their disposal, the whole process becomes untenable. You can't imagine any way that it possibly could work. And if you look at this as an engineering problem, you realize that you can't solve this problem with the current approaches that we're trying to implement. So it begs a larger question, what can you do? Is there any way to implement a system that would actually bring equal justice under the law? And I don't have the answer to that. But it's something that we have to start thinking about, something that we have to start searching for a path forward. And when you think about the local police officer, I think about these guys, and I'm not going to sit in judgment of them at all, because you think about your local police officers, your local sheriff's department or whatever. And those guys that are out there enforcing the law at the lowest levels, they're pulling over drunk drivers, they're arresting thieves, they're rounding people up, bringing them to justice. And those guys, they have to live with a very legitimate cloud of threat over them. These guys that they bring to justice could decide to seek retribution. And all police officers have to carry a weapon on them at all times. And they have to worry about their families. And look at what's going on in Minneapolis. You have federal officers that have to worry about their families being attacked. So until and unless we can come up with some sort of judicial system that can supersede the power and the might of the uber rich, it's a very difficult time to live. I am struggling with this myself, and I suspect many of you are struggling. But it's something we have to start addressing. So maybe this is step one. Start thinking about how we can implement a system where law enforcement does not have to worry about retribution from the very powerful.